Today's message is entitled Answers Through Our Suffering. Answers Through Our Suffering. Suffering is always a tough topic just to talk about in general, right? But as a believer, there's something to suffering that we must discover. First of all, how do you actually see suffering, right? Some people look at suffering as a reason not to believe in God, right? Or to believe in any God, for that matter. But how do you see suffering? How do you see like an answer for suffering? What answers do you have, right? When it comes to suffering. And sometimes when it comes to suffering, we could be, sorry to say, we can be somewhat short-sighted because of how horrible our suffering may be, right? The answer to suffering that we're looking for is stop, right? Just stop it. No more suffering. That's the answer for suffering. But how does the Bible show answers to suffering? And how does Jesus see suffering? Well, when we look at Jesus, he actually sympathizes with us. He knows how hard our suffering is because he too came as a human. But when it comes to suffering, we're always looking for answers to our suffering, meaning answers to stop that suffering. But what I want to present here today is what answers is God showing through our suffering, right? Not necessarily for the suffering to stop, but what is God trying to show through our suffering that we need to get? Because suffering in many ways is a way for us to even examine ourselves. It gives us a glimpse into where we are or where people are in our lives. And it really gives us an opportunity to kind of think things through on a deeper level. First of all, we see that Jesus, he states that he is the light of the world, right? And through today's passage, there's a lot of imagery that we can see through today's one of today's main characters, the blind man, and also the religious leaders. And this is something that we talked about. This blind man, he was literally in the dark, right? And when we're in the dark, or when we're going through suffering, how do you tend to handle it? By yourself, right? We tend to face suffering by ourselves. It's such a natural response, right? My problem, I deal with it, I fix it. And if you think about this blind man, he was born blind, especially in a time of the world where no one looked favorably on the blind or those with disabilities. I'm pretty sure he grew up with very little friends to no friends. I'm pretty sure his parents went through a lot. If you think through the life that this man lived, it's heartbreaking. And in a way, he represents kind of the world that we live in today, our fallen world. We have to understand that we're not born into a perfect world. We're actually born into a very broken world. I mean, you see it right off the bat. And this brokenness stems all the way from the beginning. As sin entered, our world has become broken. And in many ways, we're in the dark, kind of by ourselves. And what we see in today's passage is that this blind man met Jesus, who is the light of the world. And guess what he did? He brought light into this man's world. How did he do it? in the most weirdest way, through mud and washing it out. He used his spit, right? Made mud and then put it on his eyes, and he told them, go wash in the pool of Siloam. And you might think, man, this is weird. Why is he doing it this way? There's a couple of things at play here. First, he's addressing the religious nature of the Pharisees. Making mud, so this all took place on the Sabbath. Jesus likes to do this. He likes to provoke the Pharisees. He did this on the Sabbath, and he made mud, and that's considered work. And then him putting on the man's eyes, and for the man to wash his face in that manner, it's all considered work, all considered illegal on the Sabbath. But that's missing, once again, the spirit of the law versus, right, the letter of the law that we talked about 2 weeks ago. We're missing the heart of God. When God wrote or gave these laws, it wasn't for that very purpose, to make these traditions, to make it very impossible to know God's heart, but just live legalistically, right? Jesus was trying to show through the mud and wash that he is the creator of the universe, that he is the light of the world, that he is not only giving this man sight for the sake of a miracle, but he was trying to show a bigger picture of what's actually taking place. He was exposing false religion. He was exposing false faith. What did the disciples say when they saw the blind man? Who sinned? Who messed up that this man is born blind? Was it him or is it his parents? And it's funny how we look at suffering that way too at times. It's like, what did I do now, God? Right? What did I do to deserve this? And it's funny how people that are stuck in the religious mindset during this time thought in a very similar way. Who messed up? Jesus? Was it him that he was born blind, or was it his parents? And what Jesus did was illuminate, right? He showed them what is actually true religion. That it's relationship. And I bring this up a lot, but if you look carefully what's taking place here, this blind man is no longer by himself, but he met the creator of the universe come as human, who shed light, and this light was represented in his healing. And so a huge examination took place, right? The Pharisees were like, we need to interview this man. And we see all kinds of things happen during this time. And number two, who is in control, right? During this examination, the blind man is examined by the Pharisees. And they call in his parents and say, is this your son? Was he really born blind? How is he able to see? And the parents, in fear, they couldn't fully be transparent. They gave very vague answers. That's our son. He was born blind, but we have no idea what happened. I'm pretty sure this blind man explained to his parents a bajillion times. But for his parents, fear, right? Fear came into play. When you're stuck in suffering for so long, I mean, honestly, it's easy to remain in fear. Fear of what if, right? We've been doing it this way for so long, even though it's so painful, I know what to expect. So I'm going to remain. I don't want to lose what I already have, because what I have might not be, once I lose it, I might really have nothing. So in fear, the parents were like, yeah, he is our son, but I have no idea who did it. But that's how the enemy works. That's how Satan works. 1 Peter 5, 8 through 10. Let's read together. Here we go. Be sober minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. And after you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who has called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. Amen. Satan, he likes to pretend, right? He is like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. And that's a scary picture. Lion, and just any of the more ferocious animals, they are really scary, really powerful. And to see something like that in your life, it is scary. But it's only a show in many ways. It's a deception. Satan uses that so well. But it says here, resist him. Firm in your faith. Once again, not just you, but you with Christ. That's what faith is. Knowing that you have someone you're trusting in the midst of life. Because during this time, the early church, they weren't just like, oh, we just chose Christianity. They were suffering. They were staking their lives because they have seen something greater than their suffering. The same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. It's not that suffering is taken away, but in the midst of suffering, there is meaning. And it says here, after you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who has called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. This blind man, he was able to see something that his parents couldn't see and that the Pharisees couldn't see. He was starting to see who Jesus truly is. And he says, why do you keep asking me? Do you want to be his disciples? Right? And that really ticked off the Pharisees. And they were like, how dare you? We are disciples of Moses. You don't even know who you're a disciple of. And then the blind man is like, do you know who he is? And they're like, we have no idea. Then he's like, why? Then why are you saying all these things if you don't know who he is? And so we start to see where the true blindness really lies in. It's not in this blind man at all, but it was the religious leaders. It was those who couldn't see what was taking place. They chose to ignore the reality of the situation to promote their plan, their will, their kingdom. And so we need to ask ourselves, what is the true miracle here? Is the healing the true miracle? And a lot of times we think that's the answer, that the healing is the end of fill in the blank suffering. But guess what? Healing does not equal problems fixed. Yeah, it does lessen one problem that may lead to many problems, but that doesn't mean your problems in life ceases. Who knows? This blind man who was healed, he could get an eye injury and be blind again. Then what? Will he curse God? Will he go through the same things again? Is that the answer? You see, in Luke 17, there's another miraculous healing that Jesus did, where 10 lepers, people that have their flesh rotting while they're still alive, that's what leprosy is. Jesus heals 10 of them. And they all go off rejoicing and they go off on their way. Out of 10, only one returns and gives praise to Jesus. Only one recognized Jesus. Out of 10. He was like, how many were with you? He was like, 9 others. But only one returned. You see, there's something miraculous of confession, right? Something miraculous of knowing or proclaiming or asking or something kind of set in your words. Before I got married to my wife, for those who have done proposals and whatnot, it's a funny thing. Just saying, would you marry me? Will you marry me? Like that statement, such a simple statement. And for the most part, you kind of know beforehand that she's going to say yes. But the weirdest thing is, even though I knew what the answer is, even though I knew, we were already making plans, asking and making that proclamation that I love this woman who is to be my wife, and asking her, will you marry me? I was shaking. I was like, what is going on? What's wrong with me? And I don't know if you remember, if she remembers or not. But my hands like shaking, bringing the ring. I'm like, what is going on with my body, with my whole being? Why is it a shuddering, making this confession? And there's something powerful with making a confession. There's something powerful, when it comes to making that kind of decision. And when it comes to becoming a disciple of Jesus, it's not easy. What takes place right after this is a miracle. It might be hard for you to see, so let me read this aloud for you guys. Jesus heard that they had cast him out. So this happened right after the passage that we read. Jesus had heard that they had cast him out, and having found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? He answered, and who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? Jesus said to him, you have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you. He said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. Jesus said, for judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. Some of the Pharisees near him heard these things and said to him, are we also blind? Jesus said to them, if you are blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say, we see, your guilt remains. Ooh. Burn, right? It's amazing that this confession that this blind man said, Lord, I believe. The thing is, to become a disciple of Jesus, there is a cost. And this is something that people don't really like to talk about. There's a cost to following Jesus. It could be our pride, it could be a lot of things. But when we think of the cost of following Jesus, we think of this image of us having to carry the cross by ourselves, right? But the cost of following Jesus is not just us carrying the cross by ourselves, but actually with Christ. The mystery that the blind man discovered is this, that the cost of following Jesus was worth the cost because he saw that the grace that was given is greater than his suffering. It's not just that he was healed miraculously, but he knew to whom he can trust his life with. That the cost was actually worth it. And this is the mystery that we need to discover. Yes, there is a cost to becoming a disciple of Jesus Christ. However, when we understand what it means to have faith in him, we begin to see that the cost is worth it. That it is greater than our suffering, greater than the things of this world, greater than tradition, greater than today's culture. Like I mentioned during praise, right? It's not just surviving, but it's actually living life. There's a great poem that many of you may know, and it's a poem called Footprints. And maybe some of you have the poem like posted up somewhere in your home even. But this is the picture that we get. The gist of the poem is this, that every time this believer dreamed, he would always dream 2 sets of footprints. And then one day he faced so much suffering, so much hardship in his life, and when he dreamt, he only saw only 1 set of footprints. And then after the suffering passed, he had a conversation with God. He was like, Jesus, we were always walking together in my dream because I see 2 sets of footprints. But when I was going through the hardest time in my life, how come I only saw 1 set of footprints? And then Jesus replies, during that time, you could not even walk, so I had to carry you. That's why there's only 1 set of footprints. And isn't that amazing? It's a very simple poem, but it's a very deep one at the same time. That this life was not meant for you to live it alone. That we're not left in the dark, but Jesus came as a light to the world, a light to your life. Though there is a cost, the cost is actually worth it when you see who he truly is. Maybe you haven't quite seen who he truly is yet, and that's fine. But like this blind man asked, do you believe in the Son of Man? And the blind man says, what? Who is he? I would like to believe. I think we need to honestly ask ourselves, who are you, Lord? Who are you, Jesus? Are you the one whom you say you are? And today, I want to say, don't be deceived. Don't be deceived by your problems, by danger, or by crisis. Do not be deceived even by fear. Don't be deceived by culture, tradition, or living for your own kingdom or another kingdom. But ask yourself, who is in control? Are you grappled in fear? Are you stuck in just worries? Are you stuck in legalism? Who is in control? In the midst of this, like today's blind man, let's have an honest confession, right? Who are you? Who is the Son of Man? Who is the Lord of life? Ask and see how he leads you. We talked about having that time of concentration, right? As we wake up, as we spend the day, and as right before we go to sleep. And for those who are doing that, awesome. Those who are not doing that, it's okay. But I encourage you, start. Start somewhere, even if it's one. Like just waking up, you just remember better, or before you go to sleep, you just remember better. Great. Or during the day, you remember, like randomly. Even that, great. And as we have those moments of concentration, then, like we talked about 2 weeks ago, we can build that platform, that watchtower, right? That antenna to communicate with God, so that people can come to know who He is. And through suffering, we can find actual answers, not the answer of stop, but a bigger answer. And not only that, God, He will provide a means through the suffering. So let's start there. Really coming before God honestly, like the blind man in today's passage.